I drank a whole bottle of wine. I thought you were dead. No. Are they still alive? Do you think they're fighting? No. Come on, you amazing animal. You should have proven it, this amazing animal. Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, who had escaped the brutal event at the Red Wedding by chance, having just gone to the restroom, did not give up. Instead, he gathered the remnants of House Tully and recaptured Riverrun from the Freys. When the news reached Blue River City, old Walder Frey was furious. Since the events of the Red Wedding, the Freys had become the object of utter dislike and mockery throughout Westeros. Now, if they couldn't even hold Riverrun, the Freys would be even more humiliated. So, old Walder repeatedly ordered his two sons, Lothor Frey and Walder Howen, to retake Riverrun, no matter the cost. But Rosso explained that the Blackfish not only had the support of the Lannisters and Blackwoods, but also his group, and frequently led villagers to take supply wagons and camps, leaving the Freys completely overwhelmed and unable to attend. But old Walder soon grew impatient, believing these were all excuses for his son's incompetence. He had his son-in-law, Edmure Tully, brought in, held captive in the dungeons since the Red Wedding, and instructed his two sons to take the noble fish to meet his uncle and remind him who the Blackfish was, and who had orchestrated the Red Wedding for his nephew. Meanwhile, Jaime and Brienne, leading 8,000 of Lannister's troops, followed the Red Fork to Riverrun. The horses' hooves kicked up clouds of dust, and every 100 meters, several scouts would be seen watching the way. The last time Jaime's troops surrounded Riverrun, they were caught off guard by young Lord Robb Stark. This time, he would not make the same mistake again. Arriving at Riverrun, even Bronn, a soldier by birth, could see that the Freys' siege was child's play, lacking even a trench for the few soldiers. If a small force had attacked at this point, the Freys would have fled in a flash. Jaime, however, believed Bronn's military prowess surpassed that of any Lannister officer. Since Jaime had been dismissed from his position as Kingsguard, he would officially inherit the title of Lord of Canarion and the Riverrun. He hoped Bronn could become his valuable right-hand man, leading the army alongside him. As for their reward, the Lannisters would repay their debts and would certainly treat Bronn fairly. Arriving at the Freys' camp, Jaime was completely enraged by the chaos and bad smell. This looked more like a disorderly place than a military camp. What infuriated him even more was that Lothor Frey and Walder Huan were holding Edmure captive, shouting at Blackfish below Riverrun, threatening to hang Edmure first, and then end his life with the same dagger that had been used on his sister if he didn't surrender. But Blackfish stood silently on the ramparts, oblivious to the Freys' threats. A scornful smile curled his lips, and he simply said, "Freys, please do as you please," before walking off relentlessly. This left Lothor and Huan helpless. Unable to actually harm Edmure, they could only shamefully set him down. This demoralizing move struck Jaime as utterly ridiculous. He strode forward and, without further ado, took command from the two Freys, demanding they immediately re-establish the camp according to Bronn's plan, digging trenches and setting up outposts to release the scouts. He immediately prepared a meal for Edmure and sent a message to the Blackfish in the city, saying that Jaime Lannister wished to negotiate with him. Holly or a flight. He's an old man. He's got one hand, and one is on the old boy. Jaime had promised Catelyn to bring back her daughters and not raise an army against the Starks and Tullys, but now it seemed as if none of that had been fulfilled. But Jaime had obeyed the king's command, and he believed that if he could capture the castle without bloodshed, it would be a form of atonement for his past actions. After receiving the Blackfish's agreement to negotiate, Jaime traveled alone to the drawbridge of Riverrun to meet the legendary knight Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, who, in his youth, had constantly pestered him to tell him stories of the War of the Nine Kings. Please feel free to like, repost, and donate to support the Mingjing Diandian column. Old Blackfish had no intention of making peace. The siege was simply boring. Blackfish first teased Jaime, who hadn't fulfilled his promise to Catelyn, asking, does he want to return to the dungeons of Riverrun as a captive? Then Blackfish urged Jaime to follow through with his threats, saying no matter what he did, his nephew would die. Jaime threatened Blackfish that if he didn't surrender, he would harm the city and everyone would be at risk because of him. However, Blackfish stated that Riverrun was well protected and had 2 years' worth of food. If Jaime was willing to fight it out, he would be willing to fight to the end. He then turned and raised the drawbridge, leaving Jaime, who was still trying to persuade him to surrender, behind. Soon after, Brienne and Podrick arrived at Riverrun, bearing Sansa's letter. They hoped to persuade Blackfish to lead his troops north to support Jon Snow and another in the impending battle. Brienne spotted Jaime from afar, but he and Podrick were soon spotted by Lannister's scouts. However, Brienne remained calm, gripping his sword tightly at his waist and explaining that he had important matters to discuss with Jaime. While Pod waited for Brienne outside the camp, he happened to run into his former comrade, Bronn. Both had once served under Tyrion the Imp. After a series of events, although they now served different masters, they still acted friendly when they met. After all, Pod was a child imbued with a mysterious quality. "You're the one with the magic cook." Jaime and Brienne met in the tent. Times had changed, and both were filled with a mixture of emotions. Jaime was proud of Brienne for finding Sansa. However, Sansa remained a person of interest in Joffrey's murder, and Cersei still wanted her head. This made the situation between Brienne and Jaime's private meeting extremely complicated. However, Brienne had already devised a plan. He planned to enter Riverrun himself and persuade Blackfish to abandon the city and lead his troops north to support Sansa. If all went well, Brienne hoped Jaime would promise to let Blackfish and his men escape safely as a way of repaying him for his help. However, Jaime believed that Blackfish's temper was even more stubborn than Brienne's, and he wanted him to give up the family heirloom. It was simply a fantasy. However, out of respect for Blaney's affection, Jaime gave him a day to persuade him. If Blackfish still refused to cooperate before nightfall, Jaime would resort to force. Before leaving, Blaney wanted to hand the jewelry back to Jaime, believing he had fulfilled the sword's mission. However, Jaime refused, saying the sword now belonged to Blaney because he had proven his loyalty and bravery through his actions. Only in his hands could the sword truly realize its value. Blaney was slightly stunned, then solemnly withdrew the sword. He looked at Jaime and earnestly reminded him that he had sworn an oath to serve Sansa. If the two sides went to war in the future, Blaney would have no choice but to become Jaime's enemy. A hint of flashed in the eyes of the well-trained Jaime. He was lonely, but still nodded in understanding. As Jaime had expected, the stubborn old Blackfish refused to abandon the city and lead his troops to help his niece, whom he had only met once when he was a child. Riverrun was his home. He was born here and would die here. He would give it away for nothing unless the enemy walked over his body first. Late at night, seeing Blackfish still showing no sign of opening up, Jaime knew that Brienne had failed. So he walked alone into the tent where Edmure was being held captive. He was about to implement his own Lannister-style plan. Jaime first apologized to Edmure, saying that given his background, he did not deserve such treatment from the Freys. But Edmure snorted coldly. He turned his head away, unappreciative. He simply told Jaime that no matter what he did, the Blackfish would never surrender. Jaime said that the Blackfish was old and wanted nothing more than to die a quick death on the battlefield. But Edmure was different. Although he had only spent one night with his wife at the Red Wedding, he had helped Rosalind Frey become pregnant. Now their son had just been born. Didn't Edmure want to be with them? Edmure didn't seem to care. A wife he had only seen on their wedding night, and a son he had never met, whom others had repeatedly told him about. Jaime then talked about Edmure's sister, Catelyn, saying that his love for his child was greater than anything else. Just like Cersei, they would do anything to protect their children, even if it meant conflict.